horror games seem to love female protagonists. So begins the 1UP review for Fatal Frame 3, which was published on November 11th, 2005, just a few days after its November 8 NA release. As the review points out, this isn't something unique to the Fatal Frame games, and women are often chosen as protagonists in horror because, like it or not, women are generally seen as weaker and more vulnerable. Therefore, this would presumably make the game scarier than if you were playing as a buff dude who could just punch his way through everything, Doom Guy style. Although, on that note, I'd play the hell out of a game like that. Just saying. Now, let's keep in mind that Fatal Frame 3 came out in 2005. By this point, we had already seen numerous female protagonists in horror. Jill Valentine, Heather Mason, Aya Brea, etc. are probably amongst some of the most well-known, but let's not forget games like Clock Tower, Rule of Rose, Haunting Ground, etc. that were also doing great things with female protagonists. Now, a lot of these women are known for being fantastic ass-kickers in their own right, while for others they are simply normal women put in very not normal situations, and expected to fight through it and survive. The lead characters in the previous Fatal Frame games have not only been little girls, they've never been armed with anything so confidence-inspiring as a board with a nail in it. Their only weapon has consistently been a single camera. Admittedly, it's a camera that hurts ghosts, but it's never in any danger of making the player feel like they're some kind of ass kicker. As this review continues, Fatal Frame is mostly in that latter category. You're not going to see Miku, Mio, or even Lei picking up a shotgun to blast their enemies away, nor are they very physically gifted to begin with. Literally all that stands between them and death is, well, an old camera. Either way, it's an interesting way to start a review, as it was definitely this era of video games that gave us so many great female protagonists, and Fatal Frame always has been, and likely always will be, up there with giving us some of the greats. Shibata has even gone on record himself, stating that he also prefers the main characters in his horror games to be women, because that's simply more frightening. That's the reason why Kay, the sole male character we can play as in 3, was also made so weak. It's not exactly scary if Kay can just punch his way through the mansion, and so his playstyle involves more hiding instead, forcing you to feel the same fear you might instinctively feel while playing as the women. GameSpot shared their review on November 18th, just over a week after the game released. Tecmo's Fatal Frame series taps the Japanese occult to provide chilling tales of secret rituals and the ill-fated individuals sacrificed to serve them. And Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented, treads the same terrible path. Enjoyment of the game's dark subject matter is diluted slightly by some awkward controls and strange pacing, but there are still plenty of good chills to be had. This review makes note of how Fatal Frame 3 is basically a convergence of all the series' existing stories so far, making it almost a little confusing with how much is going on. There's almost a sense of too many stories converging, though the main theme of Tormented manages to carry them off well. Fatal Frame 1 and 2 were both standalone games, where you didn't have to play one to understand the other, but 3 was the first time in the series where that changed. In fact, it clarified that 1 and 2 were actually sequential, and 2 wasn't a prequel like previously thought. It also brought back both the protagonists, making the first time in series history that all main protagonists appear in the same game. However, if you haven't played either of the previous games, you won't be lost, as there are plenty of supplemental materials to bring you up to speed on former events. Of course, this game wasn't able to escape the bad controls that often plagued this era, with GameSpot noting, these sequences can be hindered by the controls, since all the characters run very slowly, turn somewhat slowly, and can be a victim of forced perspective rooms that have a nice cinematic look, but can be cramped and terrible to fight in. Something I found interesting about this review, however, was the mention of the constant switching between the Manor of Sleep and Day's house. Again, a first for the series, where you can just spend some time at home, almost just relaxing, while you develop photos, find some more files, etc. Yes, the hauntings increase over time, but it's still technically downtime. The frequent homestays do tend to lower the overall level of tension somewhat, since you're not unceasingly assailed by evil. But toward the end, even your home isn't the haven you'd expect it to be. I personally find this to be quite similar to Silent Hill 4: The Room, which came out roughly a year earlier in 2004. Obviously, both games play out quite differently, but the constant returning to a home base that is getting less and less safe as time goes on is very similar, and it's perhaps unsurprising that as a haunted house enjoyer, I'm a massive fan of both of these games. GameSpy shared their review on November 16, noting, "Fatal Frame 3: The Tormented builds on the concepts developed in the first two incarnations of the series, and is a strong contender for the title of Best Game in the franchise, even if some of its elements are starting to feel a little dated." A common trend amongst many of these reviews, and indeed I feel this reflects the general consensus at the time, was that the games were great, and were getting better with each subsequent entry, but they were overall still a little samey. And indeed, by 2005, the controls, while still feeling better than Fatal Frame 1, for example, just weren't amazing. They also argue that Fatal Frame 3 is by far the most challenging game in the series, but once again, coming for the unfun controls. But even leaving aside the combat issues, there are some frustrating kinks in the control scheme that desperately need to be worked out before the fourth installment in the franchise. Little did they know that something even worse than PS2 horror controls was coming. The dreaded Wii Remote. IGN has always been pretty favourable when it comes to the old Fatal Frame games, and that doesn't change here. A lot more coherent than Crimson Butterfly's eerie but disjointed narrative. The Tale of the Tormented has a lot of different layers to it that satisfy on a number of levels. They go into being able to play as different characters with different abilities, a first for the series. But, like everyone else, note that these games aren't really offering up much that we haven't seen time and time again by this point, particularly when it comes to puzzle design. And of course, they come for the controls as well. Now, since I've played through just about every known entry in the genre since Alone in the Dark, I'm more than used to these stiff reactions. But with games such as Resident Evil 4 and the more recent Obscure, offering true forward-thinking control elements, it's hard to be as forgiving with Fatal Frame 3's refusal to move on. Yes, Resident Evil 4's controls were such an upgrade at the time that even games like Fatal Frame were being dragged for not fixing how bad they felt to play. Deserved, honestly, and while it took them a while, I honestly think Fatal Frame 5 finally hit that sweet spot where everything just felt great to play, and I was finally channeling most of my efforts into actually fighting the ghosts, and not fighting the controls. Took them a while, but they got there in the end. Meanwhile, Eurogamer, who released their review on January 6, 2006, points out something that sadly feels like it hasn't changed much today. No matter how many rave reviews the Project Zero games seem to get over here, a mixture of publisher indifference, retailer apathy, and consumer foolishness has maddeningly conspired to completely scupper any chance of Tecmo's superb survival horror series selling in Europe. I love Fatal Frame. Presumably, you love Fatal Frame. But at the end of the day, Fatal Frame was just never the strongest selling series, despite people loving it at the time, and despite reviews calling every single entry in the series great. Why? Why did this series never reach the heights of Resident Evil or Silent Hill? It's something to be studied, honestly. Despite a mostly positive review, they do point out, again, one of the major points of contention from all these older games that isn't the controls. Where the game falls down is its frustrating use of static camera angles. Needless to say, during exploration, these are excellent ways of delivering tension, but it's a pain in the ass when you can't tell where enemies are approaching from in narrow, confined corridors or awkwardly designed rooms. I'm gonna be that person as well and point out that Resident Evil 4 came out in early 2005. I was there. I still remember it, clear as day. Why did so many people jump the bones of this game so hard? Because, compared to all the horror efforts we had beforehand, it felt goddamn nice to play. The gameplay was so good that it pretty much became the standard for all games in the genre that followed it. And I say that as someone who's honestly not a big fan of RE4. Not for gameplay reasons, of course. My reasons are purely story-wise. But the early 2000s were full of great games and great stories that were hampered by shit controls, and games refusing to move out of their comfort zone. Which Fatal Frame also wouldn't do until the 4th installment of the series. Although, whether you could call those changes successful is a topic for another video. As scary, absorbing, and enjoyable as the game is, as a whole, it's fair to observe that it's been seriously padded out in ways that aren't always that much fun to endure. I've noticed in recent years that a lot of gamers, and I assume many of these gamers are around my age, where we grew up during this period of burgeoning survival horror, have argued that games are too hand-holdy these days. You don't have to think. Just do what the screen tells you. I'd argue that, yes, there are definitely a lot of games that do that, perhaps too much. But there's also a reason for that, and you can see why in these older reviews. Nostalgia often blurs our memories of things that weren't very fun at the time. 20 years later, we might just remember that we loved the atmosphere, or the story of a game we spent so many late nights playing. But over time, we've forgotten how arse it felt to actually play. These games were brutal and absolutely did not hold your hand. You could spend hours wandering around the Manor of Sleep with no idea what to do next. Some people love that, and more power to you if you're one of them. But many more don't, and it's why objectives and markers are so common now. And yes, even at the time, there were plenty of people who didn't like not knowing where to go next. Giving the player more information about what to do next wouldn't take any of the fun out of the game. If anything, you'd get more out of it by not feeling like you're wasting your time going on endless fool's errands. And once again, let's wrap up with a few print reviews at the time. The official PlayStation 2 magazine from the UK stated, "This is classic, old-school survival horror. Forget Resident Evil 4's reinvention of the genre. PZ3 deals in fixed camera angles, puzzles, keys, limited ammo. Well, film in this case. Scratching noises under the floorboards and, did I just see something in the mirror? Double takes." Meanwhile, Australia's Hyper magazine, April 2006 edition states, "So, with 3 playable characters, is it 3 times as fun? Not quite. While it's rewarding to follow each of the protagonist's personal tales, the real thrill is scaring yourself shirtless in the game's awesomely presented haunted houses. And while this aspect is as technically good as it ever has been, you'll feel panicked and want to play dead more than once throughout, the only gripe here is that it's really starting to feel a little old. A gripe we've seen again and again throughout these reviews. With hindsight, we now know that Fatal Frame 3 was the last of the classic Fatal Frames. For better or worse, the series did drastically change direction after this, at least gameplay-wise, when it moved to the Wii. But that's a story for another video. And that's a look at some of the reviews for Fatal Frame 3 that came out with the game's release 20 years ago. What do you guys think? Do you agree with their assessments? Were they too harsh or not harsh enough on some aspects? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.